The dinner rush at Harlow's was the kind of controlled chaos that Emma Calloway had learned to move through like water finding its path downhill. She carried 3 plates on one arm and a bread basket in the other hand, smiled at table 7 without meaning it, and kept her eyes moving across the floor the way her manager Dennis had taught her in the first week. Know your section. Own your section. Never let them see you sweat. She had been doing this for 3 years. Ever since her mother Diane's second hospitalization had made the idea of finishing her business degree a distant, polite dream rather than a plan. The tips at Harlow's were good. The hours were brutal. Emma chose to focus on the tips. Tonight, the restaurant was at capacity. A private booking in the East Wing had been confirmed 2 days ago, and Dennis had pulled her aside that afternoon with the expression he reserved for moments he considered serious. "Sterling party," he had said, lowering his voice as though the name itself required reverence. "Rowan Sterling. Do not spill anything. Do not be clever. Do not do that thing you do where you argue with difficult guests." Emma had nodded and smiled, and thought privately that she would do exactly what she always did, which was handle whatever came her way. She had heard of Rowan Sterling the way everyone in Chicago had heard of him. He was the kind of man who appeared in newspaper headlines and on the covers of business magazines, always photographed in profile, always looking as though he was thinking about something more important than the photographer in front of him. Sterling Law Group had won 37 consecutive high-profile cases. Rowan himself had not lost a case since he was 29 years old, and people in legal circles talked about that streak the way sports fans talked about unbeaten seasons. He was reportedly cold, reportedly brilliant, reportedly the last person on earth you wanted sitting across from you in any negotiation, courtroom, or boardroom. Emma carried a bottle of 2018 Burgundy toward the East Wing and reminded herself that she did not care about any of that. The East Wing held a long table with 8 people seated around it, men in suits that cost more than Emma's monthly rent, a woman in a cream blazer who radiated the particular confidence of someone would never once questioned whether she belonged in a room, and at the head of the table, the man she recognized immediately from every photograph she had ever seen. The photographs had done a deeply inadequate job. Rowan Sterling was tall, even seated. Dark hair, clean lines, jaw like something designed rather than born. His eyes were a shade of gray that made Emma think of winter light, and they were currently fixed on the man beside him with the focused attention of someone who was already 3 moves ahead in a conversation. He wore no tie. His shirt was white and perfectly pressed. He had the quietly immovable quality of someone who had never once in his adult life been told no and meant it. Emma began pouring wine for the far end of the table. She was reaching across to fill a glass near the center when it happened. The man to her left shifted his chair back without warning. The movement caught Emma's elbow. The Burgundy went sideways in a slow and then very fast arc and landed directly on the sleeve of Rowan Sterling's white shirt. The table went silent. Emma felt the silence the way you feel. Cold room the moment you step into it. She looked at the spreading red stain, and then she looked at Rowan Sterling, who had stopped mid-sentence and was now looking down at his sleeve with an expression so perfectly still it was difficult to read. She set the bottle down. She pulled the white cloth from her apron, and she said, with absolute steadiness, "I am so sorry. That was entirely my fault." She began to blot the fabric without waiting for his permission. "It was instinct. You addressed the problem immediately. You did not stand there apologizing while the stain set." His hand came down over hers, stopping her. Not harsh. Simply definitive. He looked at her for the first time directly, and Emma held the eye contact because she was not in the habit of looking away first. "It was not your fault," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. Even in those 5 words there was a quality of precision. It's like someone who had trained himself never to waste syllables. The man beside me moved his chair. "Doesn't matter whose fault it was," Emma said. "What matters is getting the stain out before it dries." Something shifted almost invisibly in his expression. "Do you have a plan for that?" he asked, and there was the faintest edge of something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. "Club soda. Cold water. kitchen has both. She met his eyes. I can have your jacket brought out from the coat check and treated tonight. Or you can send it to a cleaner tomorrow, and the restaurant will cover the bill. Your choice. He studied her for a moment that lasted slightly. Longer than was comfortable. The cleaner, he said finally. Then, I'll have the information written up for you? Before you leave? Emma straightened, picked up the bottle, and looked at him one more time. I'll bring a fresh glass. She walked back toward the kitchen at her normal pace. Behind her, she heard the table resume conversation. She did not hear what was said, but she heard a short sound from the head of the table that might, in a different universe, have been the beginning of a laugh. Dennis was waiting for her near the service station with the expression of a man who had just watched a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. She cut him off before he could speak. He's fine. The shirt is a problem, but I handled it. He's not upset. How do you know he's not upset? Because if he were upset, everyone at that table would know it. She picked up a fresh glass. He's fine, Dennis. She returned to the East Wing and served the rest of the evening without incident. She refilled glasses when they needed refilling, cleared plates with efficient invisibility, and did not look at the head of the table more than was necessary for her job, but twice. When she was moving through the section, she had the distinct and prickling sensation of being watched. And when she glanced up the second time, Rowan Sterling was indeed looking at her, not with irritation, not with the lingering displeasure of someone cataloging a grievance, but with the focused and slightly unsettling attention of someone who was genuinely trying to figure something out. Emma looked away first. She chose to at the end of the night, when the Sterling party was settling their bill and gathering coats. Patrick Wells approached the service desk and handed Emma a card with the dry cleaner information and a tip that made her blink. She started to say it was too much, and he waved her off with a cheerful grin. Rowan's idea, he said. He said the woman who didn't flinch deserved it. Emma looked at the card. Then she looked across the room to where Rowan Sterling was shrugging on his coat, his back to her. As though he sensed it, he turned. Their eyes met across the length of the restaurant. He gave her nothing. No smile, no nod. Just that calm, measuring look. Emma tucked the card into her apron and went back to work. She told herself that was the end of it. Famous lawyers came through Harlow's occasionally, and then they went back to their famous lives, and that was how the world worked. She was wrong about that. She would find out just how wrong 3 days later, when Dennis called her into his office and told her, with an expression of complete bewilderment, that Rowan Sterling had made a reservation for Friday night and had specifically requested her. Emma sat with that information for a moment. Then she untied her apron, retied it, and said, "Tell him table 9 has the best light." Friday came and Rowan Sterling arrived at 7 exactly. Gemma noted was the kind of punctuality that announced itself without trying. He came alone this time. No Patrick, no associates in expensive suits. Just him and a leather document folio that he set on the chair beside him the way other people set a coat. Emma approached table 9 with her notepad and her practiced composure. "Welcome back," she said. "Can I start you with water or something else?" "Still water," he said, and then he looked up from the menu. "You're not going to ask why I came back. It's not my job to ask why guests come back," Emma said pleasantly. "It's my job to make sure they want to." He looked at her for a beat. "Sit down," she blinked. "I'm sorry? I have a proposal I'd like to discuss with you. It will take approximately 4 minutes. Sit down." Emma glanced around the floor. The section was manageable. Gloria was covering table 12. She looked back at Rowan Sterling, who was watching her with that same careful attention from the other night. And she made a decision that she later admitted to Gloria was either brave or catastrophically stupid. She sat. He opened the folio. Inside was a single page, printed cleanly. "I've been managing my schedule with a rotating series of personal assistants for 2 years. None of them have lasted longer than 4 months. The most recent one resigned last Tuesday." "I'm sorry to hear that," Emma said. "You're not, but that's fine." He slid the page toward her. "I need someone organized, calm under pressure, difficult to rattle, and capable of managing a household staff of 3 alongside a professional calendar that changes daily." The salary is listed at the bottom. Emma looked at the page. She read the number at the bottom. She looked at it again to make sure she had read it correctly. It was more than 3 times what she made it. Harlow's, including tips. She slid the page back. Why me? Because you spilled wine on a man worth $400 million and your first instinct was to solve the problem rather than apologize for it. He picked up the page. And because when I looked at you across this room on Tuesday night, you didn't look away like someone who felt guilty. You looked away like someone who simply had somewhere else to be. Emma was quiet for a moment. I don't have a background in professional assistance. I know. I had you looked into. She stiffened. You had me looked into. I look into everyone I'm considering doing business with. His tone was completely even. Emma Calloway, 26, enrolled part-time in a business program at Northeastern Illinois, is currently on a leave of absence. Works double shifts 3 times a week. No criminal record. Every manager you've ever worked for described you as dependable and difficult to destabilize. He paused. Those are qualities I pay well for. Emma sat with the fact that this stranger knew more about her professional history than some of her friends did. She should have found it alarming. She found it mostly irritating. And if I say no, she asked, then I order the lamb and we never speak of this again. She studied him across the table. He was not performing this conversation. There was no charm offensive, no attempt to make himself likable. He simply sat there, presenting facts the way someone might present evidence, which she supposed was exactly what he was doing. I'll think about it, she said, and stood. Something crossed his face that was almost surprise. You'll think about it. He said 4 minutes. That was 5. She picked up her notepad. I'll bring your water. She told her mother about it that night. Sitting at the small kitchen table in the apartment they shared in Pilsen, both of them with tea going cold in front of them. Diane listened without interrupting, which was the thing Emma loved most about her mother. When Emma finished, Diane said, "What does your stomach say?" "My stomach says it's too much money to be simple." "In your head." Emma turned the mug in her hands. "My head says the medical bills aren't going anywhere." Diane reached across and covered Emma's hand with hers. "Take the job, baby. But keep your eyes open." Emma called Patrick Wells the next morning and said she had one condition. She needed the schedule to allow her to continue her evening classes when her leave of absence ended in the fall. Patrick was quiet for a moment and then said he would confirm with Rowan. The confirmation came back within an hour. Agreed. She gave her notice at Harlow's on Monday. Dennis looked personally wounded. Gloria hugged her for a long time and made her promise to text every day. The Sterling townhouse on the north side of the city was the kind of building that did not announce itself. No grand gate, no ostentatious detail. Just a 4-story brownstone that had been renovated with the kind of quiet expense that was more impressive for not trying to impress. Emma arrived on her first morning at 8 o'clock and was met at the door by Bernard, the house manager, a compact man in his 60s who had the energy of someone who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He showed her the house. The kitchen, the library, the 2 guest rooms, the home office on the 3rd floor where Rowan worked on evenings and weekends. Bernard explained the staff schedule, the grocery system, the preferred vendors for cleaning and maintenance, and the precise and non-negotiable rule about the home office. No one entered without being asked, not even to clean. Emma asked. "Mr. Sterling cleans it himself on Saturday mornings," Bernard said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had long ago stopped having opinions about this. Rowan arrived home that first evening at just past 9. Emma was in the kitchen going through the weekly calendar on her laptop when she heard the front door. She heard him move through the house with the automatic efficiency of someone following a deeply worn groove. And then he appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped when he saw her. "You stayed late," he said. The calendar needed organizing. "Your Thursday has 3 conflicts, and your Friday morning is physically impossible unless you found a way to be in 2 places." He crossed to the refrigerator and opened it. "Fix Thursday. Cancel the Friday breakfast. The Friday breakfast is with your largest client." He paused. "Move the site visit. Site visit has 12 people attending." He closed the refrigerator without taking anything and looked at her. "Fix it. Miss Calloway. That's what I'm paying you for." "I will," she said, and looked back at her laptop. "There's lamb in the refrigerator if you haven't eaten." Bernard left it covered on the second shelf. Pause. "I didn't ask about food." "No," Emma agreed. "But you opened the refrigerator and closed it without taking anything, and it's 9:15. So I'm guessing you haven't eaten." The silence had a different quality than usual. "Thank you," he said finally, and his voice was a fraction less controlled than she had heard it before. She didn't look up. "Good night, Mr. Sterling." The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Emma arrived at 8, organized the day, managed Bernard and the 2 other staff members, handled Rowan's personal calendar with the ferocity of someone protecting a border, and left by 7 most evenings. They developed a shorthand, kind of efficient conversational economy where a look could communicate what would have taken other people. A paragraph. She learned his patterns. He took his coffee without sugar and would not touch it if it was less than a certain temperature. He worked best between 5 and 7 in the morning and was unreachable before his first cup. He did not talk for the sake of talking. But when he spoke about a case he was working, he became a completely different kind of still. Focused inward in a way that made Emma think of someone handling something they genuinely cared about. She also learned that the coldness everyone talked about was not exactly coldness. It was more like a house where all the curtains had been drawn for so long the people inside had forgotten they were drawn. The warmth was there. It was simply not accustomed to being looked for. The first time she saw it clearly was a Tuesday afternoon when she was at her desk, near the front room, and heard raised voices from the sitting room where Rowan was meeting with Senator Hollis Crane. She could not make out words. She made out tone. Rowan's voice stayed level. The senators got louder. Then the senator said something short and sharp, and Rowan said something back in a voice so quiet Emma could not hear it at all. And then the senator left. Passing through the hall without looking at her, Rowan appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Schedule a call with Patrick for 6 tonight," he said. "Already done," Emma said. "I scheduled it when the senator's voice went up." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Something in the set of his shoulders was different from usual. Not defeat. Something more like the weight of something he had not decided yet. "He's pressuring me to drop evidence on a case," Rowan said. He said it without apparent calculation. As though he had not entirely decided to say it before he said it, Emma turned in her chair to face him fully. "Will you?" "No. Then what's the problem?" He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. "He's threatened to make a problem. For you." He did not answer, which was its own answer. Emma turned back to her laptop. "I'm not afraid of senators," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, he was still in the doorway, and there was something in his face that looked like the beginning of relief. It was the first time Emma thought that maybe the most important thing Rowan Sterling had ever been missing was not a better assistant. It was someone who did not need him to be invincible. The threat arrived on a Thursday. Emma found out about it from Gloria, who called her at noon nearly breathless with the news that a story had appeared on a local gossip blog that morning about Harlow's restaurant. The story claimed that a former employee, unnamed but described in detail that pointed unmistakably to Emma, had been dismissed for theft from the register. There was no accusation of a crime, nothing actionable, just enough detail to be damaging and enough vagueness to be unprovable. Emma sat in Rowan's kitchen and read the article twice on her phone. She knew it was false. She had never been dismissed from anything. She had given her notice properly and left with a reference. But she also knew that the kind of mud that gets thrown rarely asks permission before sticking, and that whoever had written this piece had chosen details carefully enough to know where she had worked and when. She thought about Senator Crane. She thought about Rowan's words. "He's threatened to make a problem." She set her phone face down on the counter and finished preparing the morning schedule. When Rowan came downstairs at 7:30, she handed him his coffee at the correct temperature and said, "There's something you need to see." She showed him the article. She watched him read it. His face did not change in any way she could identify from outside. But she knew him well enough now to see the stillness go a different quality, harder set. He looked up. "When did this go up?" "Early this morning," Did you call anyone? I called my mother to make sure she hadn't seen it first. Then I came here. He set the phone down on the counter with a controlled precision that she recognized as the thing he did when he was keeping something tightly held. This is Crane. I know. He's doing this because I won't drop the evidence. I know that too. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, there was something unguarded in his face. Not softness exactly, but honesty. Raw and direct. Emma, I'm going to fix this. She looked back at him steadily. I know you are. But I want you to understand something first. He waited. I am not the reason to fix it, she said. Fix it because it's right. Fix it because Crane is using his position to intimidate a witness and destroy evidence, and that matters regardless of whether it touches me. She picked up her own coffee. If you fix it for me, he wins anyway because he found the pressure point. If you fix it because it's right, there is no pressure point. Rowan stood very still in the morning light of his kitchen, and Emma could not tell what he was thinking. She had learned to read him over these months, but this was a new expression. Something she did not have a file for yet. You're the only person in 3 years who has told me how to do my job, he said. Someone should. A silence. Then, very quietly, he said, You're right, called Patrick from the kitchen table, while Emma made eggs neither of them had asked for. She listened without appearing to listen as he laid out the next moves in a voice that was all precision and control. The lawyer voice she had heard through walls and over phones for months. He was calling in a contact at the State Ethics Board. He was accelerating the filing on the case. He was pulling documentation that Crane would not have anticipated he still had access to. When he hung up, he looked at the eggs she had placed in front of him. Didn't ask for breakfast. He said, You also didn't eat last night, she said. I checked the refrigerator. He looked at her for a long moment. You checked the refrigerator. Someone has to. He picked up the fork. The next 2 weeks moved fast in the way that consequential things often do. It's faster than anyone is quite ready for. Rowan filed the accelerated case. Patrick managed the press. The Ethics Board contact made 3 calls that mattered. Senator Crane, who had spent 30 years in positions of power, discovered what it felt like to have his pressure applied back at him with compound interest. The blog post was traced, not publicly but privately, to a junior staffer with connections to the senator's office. Harlow's manager Dennis sent a letter without being asked, attesting to Emma's impeccable record and her voluntary resignation with 2 weeks' notice. The letter was not necessary. It was kind. Emma cried a little when she read it, alone in her apartment, and told no one. The story disappeared within a week. These things do when the person who planted them no longer has the leverage to keep watering them. On the day the case filing went through, and Crane's challenge was formally dismissed, Patrick called Emma to tell her before it hit the news. She thanked him and sat with the news quietly for a moment, and then went back to reorganizing the Thursday schedule, which still had a conflict she had not solved. Rowan came home early that evening. She heard the door at 6, which was unusual. She looked up from her laptop as he appeared in the hall, jacket over his arm, tie loosened, and she realized that for the first time in the months she had known him, he looked tired in a way he was not trying to conceal. He sat down on the chair across from her desk, she had never done before. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her. Thank you, he said. For what? For telling me to do it right. Emma closed her laptop. You already knew the right thing. I needed someone to say it without flinching. They looked at each other across the small distance between them, and Emma felt something shift in the room the way weather shifts, the pressure changing before the rain begins. She had been careful with herself for months. Careful not to name what accumulated in quiet moments, what she felt when he laughed at something low and genuine, what moved in her chest when he remembered things she had mentioned once in passing weeks ago. Rowan, she said, and it was the first time she had used his name without the professional prefix, and they both noticed. He noticed in the way his whole body. Stilled, I need to tell you something, she said. I need to tell you something too, he said. And I'm going to say it first because if you go first, I'll spend the whole time thinking about what you said instead of what I'm trying to say. Emma was quiet. He straightened. I don't do this. I don't know how to do this. Patrick has told me this for 15 years, that I built my whole life so that it wouldn't require me to need anyone. And I thought that was efficient, and I thought that was practical, and then you sat down at my table 4 months ago and told me it didn't matter whose fault the wine was. What mattered was solving the problem. He stopped. And I have been solving problems my whole life, and somehow you are the first person who ever made me feel like I might be one worth solving. Emma looked at him for a long time. That, she said, was the most complicated way anyone has ever told me they have feelings.
What?
Something moved across his face. The beginning of a real smile, the kind she had seen only a handful of times. I'm a lawyer, I know. She stood up and crossed the small distance between them and sat on the edge of the coffee table directly in front of him, so that they were nearly level. Rowan, I've been watching. You for 4 months try to function inside a life with no warmth in it, and I kept bringing you food you didn't ask for because I couldn't figure out any other way to say that you deserve to be taken care of too. He looked at her hands and then at her face. That's why the eggs. That's why the eggs. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to move, and covered her hand with his. His hand was warm. She had not expected it to be so warm. I don't know how to be someone who lets people in, he said. You'll learn. How do you know? Emma looked at him with a steadiness she genuinely felt. Because you're the best learner I've ever seen, and because you're not actually as cold as you think you are. You're just careful. She turned her hand under his so their palms were together. I'm careful too. But I'm not scared. He looked at her in that way he had, that total focused attention, and said, I know. That's what I noticed first. Outside the window, Chicago was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on across the city, the sound of traffic softening into night. Inside the townhouse, with its drawn curtains, something that had been held very still for a very long time began carefully and with great intention to open. Rowan Sterling, who had won every case he had ever tried and built every wall he had ever needed, looked at Emma Calloway and chose, for the first time and longer than he could honestly account for, not to win, but to begin. And Emma, who had walked into his life carrying a bottle of wine and a composure she had earned the hard way, smiled at him and thought that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a person is the thing they never saw coming. She had known his reputation. Cold, powerful, undefeated. What nobody had thought to mention was that the man underneath it had been waiting, in his own careful and unknowing way, for someone stubborn enough to stay